right, let's talk about your the talk that you gave at the in-person meetup that we were just discussing. And so, you what you gave your own description, and then I kind of have my take of kind of what I was thinking. Like, what was the title of the talk, and what you kind of went over?
So the title of the talk is Delighting Users with Performant Apps. Kind of taking like a real deep dive into the UX that really takes an app from being your standard kind of boring app, for lack of a better word, but gives it some personality while also keeping in mind that this app could be loaded on less than ideal situations, and so we want to make sure that it's performant, it's following best practices, and we used an example app of Apple Music as like the kind of starting point because it does have a lot of cool personality and like interesting interactions that at first glance seem pretty easy to implement, but in deep dives, like you notice these are all three things that would instantly cause performance issues.
Yeah, one thing right off the bat, I did think it was funny while you're giving your talk that like there's a larger message that you're trying to get across, but you are such a good, experienced, uh, so good and experienced at giving talks that that kind of giving that example of Apple Music kind of brings people in, even if they don't understand the technical side of it. They're like, oh, I've seen Apple Music before, and like, you know what I mean?
Apple Music,
Yeah.
Spotify, it doesn't necessarily matter. They're both similar enough, but you have a reference point for what is like the level that we're trying to achieve, and how do we like uh, have that as our North Star, more or less.
Yeah, but my main takeaway, or the thing that overarching thing, correct me if I'm wrong, is this sort of difference between UX and UI. That like so many, especially junior software developers, but even more experienced software developers, focus on the UI, focus on, I mean, okay, give me the requirements of what's supposed to appear on the page, and they program to that, and okay, it's got that button, or it's got that whatever, or if they're working off a screen static design, like okay, it has that look or whatever, sort of sometimes. But there's a whole different thing when you really appreciate UX of like the thing you were focused on was in animations, and how hard it is to do like top tier like UX with animations, to do it right and do it in where it works in all different situations and scenarios. So like I feel like that was your underlying message, like overall, like without getting into like the technical details of like how you actually did that particular animation. It was more like that it takes a lot of hard work to do this right, and but B, that it is worth the effort if you do care about user experience and what your users think, right?
Right. It's the old like 80/20 rule of things. Like it's general rule of 80/20 is that 80% of the product will take 20% of the time, but the last 20% of the product will take 80% of your actual time. So in this case, building out the like that rough version, that was easy. It didn't take a lot of time, and it was most of the work. But the animations and figuring out how to queue everything up took so much longer than it did to actually build the app. But it's such a small part of the overall experience that if you don't know to hit that button, no one's ever going to see it. People could go throughout their entire life of using your app or somebody or some other app where something is never interacted with and they never get that experience, but it still matters because it completes the whole overarching like experience.
I think the difference, maybe I'm wrong here, but like I've done a couple different products over the years, and sometimes UX didn't matter as much, sometimes not. I feel like part of it, at least, is for the usage. Is it something that a user goes back to time and again to use on a fairly regular basis, or is it something that they are trying to achieve just like one objective and then they're out, and maybe they'll come back or maybe not or whatever. And I think that with the okay, achieve that objective type thing, like fill out a form or whatever else, I mean, UX still matters, but like not nearly as much, because those little friction points, like they're so focused on the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they kind of will overlook that or whatever. But the apps where they just like use it on a regular basis, come back, or that you want them to, um, that's where it really matters.
Well, yes, but I also push like the little interactions that it's a little bit of a friction point where maybe they're not going to spend so much time on this. It's just going to be like a little blip in their in the app's lifetime. Still, having that be not a terrible experience is still important. You still want to make sure that whatever interaction is happening in there, sometimes it's going to be, I don't know, you click a button and then you have like a small animation to like show that, hey, something's happening. Or it's going to be, okay, we have your shopping cart in this case, and we're going to have this complex animation to show you everything that you have in there, just to make sure that it seems like as we're loading and streaming things in from the database, we can give you like contextual feedback onto, yeah, we're fetching things. You can see them animating right onto the page. That's the fetch that's happening at the moment. All of it still really matters and really just improves user experience.
Yeah, it's interesting with that last, you mentioned 80/20, and okay, that last 20%, like you're saying, requires like a ton of work to do to get right in a lot of cases. And potentially even the user in the moment doesn't even realize how good it is. But one thing I've noticed with a lot of these apps that have put in the time on that kind of extra 20% is that you have a lot of users who just like it and they don't necessarily know exactly why. They're just like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just like using it. Just feels, you know what I mean?
So I went to before like tech and everything. I was a designer, and that was like always the story that I think every professor like kind of instilled in us was good design is when people like something but they can't pinpoint why, and they're just like it
mhm.
feels right. And
Yes.
that is so much on like the UX part of building web apps these days. Doesn't matter if people can't explain why something is good, but if their intuition is, it just feels right. It feels right. That means that you did a good job.
Actually, you just reminded me of one other thing on the opposite side of this. So for one of the products that we worked on, this budgeting app, we actually spent a crazy amount of time doing user interviews through like there's actually a site userinterviews.com. You can hire people to do a video session, have them go through the app, and you can kind of see their reactions and stuff like that. And like a ton of times we had users that were like, would tell us how they feel, and it would be like, oh, I just don't feel like this is trustworthy, or I don't feel like they would say they wouldn't say like the animation is not great, they wouldn't say that, but they would say something else that it just didn't feel right, or like or something, or it felt unprofessional, or like use words like
Mm-hmm.
that. And then after discussions with our product team, we realized it was because of some UX related issues, and like once we kind of made it better, like it cleared up some of that.
Yeah, you're translating emotional response to technical issues, and that is not an that's a kind of translation that you don't necessarily want to always do, but it is a very important skill to have.
Definitely. Cool.